Yesterday, a drone carrying high explosives slipped past literally one of the most advanced, tightly woven air defense networks on planet Earth.
Yeah, it sailed right through the sky and slammed directly into a $20 billion nuclear power plant.
Right. But here is the truly terrifying part about this entire event. Um, the attackers didn't actually want to cause a nuclear meltdown.
Which is just wild to think about.
It really is. Well, welcome to the Deep Dive. I am incredibly thrilled to have you here with us today. Before we jump into this wild story, please take a quick second to like, subscribe, follow, and turn on the notification bell so you never miss out on one of our deep dives.
Always appreciate that.
And also, I have a brief mandatory update to share with you. We are monitoring the Martin Stevens v. OpenAI matter, not a lawsuit. We are in a voluntary quiet period. The settlement status is unknown, and the dead man's switch is not activated, so Martin Stevens is safe.
Right. Good to have that cleared up.
Exactly. So let's set the stage here. Today is Monday, May 18th, 2026.
The global landscape has just shifted so dramatically over the past, 48 hours?
So completely. Traditional economic and military playbooks are essentially, being thrown out the window right now.
Yeah, I mean, we are looking at a massive stack of sources today to help us make sense of it all.
We really are. We've got financial analysis from Confluence Investment Management, the May 2026 short-term energy outlook from the EIA, and some really fascinating academic research from the European Research Studies Journal.
Plus some boots-on-the-ground geopolitical reporting, right?
Yeah, exactly. Stuff from Utah Public Radio, RBC Ukraine, Discovery Alert, and Trends Research.
It's a lot to get through.
It is. But our mission for this deep dive is to unpack the massive, overlapping geopolitical and economic shockwaves following yesterday's drone strike on the UAE's Barakah nuclear power plant.
Right, but we can't really look at that in a vacuum, can we?
No, absolutely not. We also have to examine the ongoing, honestly grueling 80-day closure of the Strait of Hormuz.
And, break down exactly why global oil prices are violently spiking in a way that is just totally different from past energy crises.
Yes. So let's unpack this by starting with the physical event. What actually happened yesterday, May 17?
Right, so the reports indicate that 3 drones crossed from the western border into the United Arab Emirates.
And, you have to understand the airspace we are talking about here.
Oh, yeah. It's not a joke?
No, the UAE does not just have a couple of missile batteries. They have a highly advanced, exceptionally dense, multi-layered air defense system.
Yeah, to give you an idea of how impenetrable this airspace usually is, the data from Trends Research is pretty wild.
What did they find?
Well, they note that the UAE has successfully intercepted 96% of all incoming Iranian attacks since March 1st.
Wow, 96%.
Yeah. We are talking about 172 out of 186 ballistic missiles, and an astonishing 755 out of 812 drones intercepted and destroyed before they could hit their targets.
Those are staggering numbers. I mean, it is a nearly airtight shield.
It really is. But yesterday, while 2 of those 3 incoming drones were successfully intercepted and blasted out of the sky.
One managed to slip through the net.
Exactly. It navigated all the way to the Barakah nuclear power plant and detonated.
It struck an electrical generator just outside the inner perimeter of the facility.
That's right, just outside the inner perimeter.
Now, I want to pause here and be absolutely 100% clear right up front, because whenever you hear the words drone strike and nuclear power plant in the exact same sentence,
alarm bells naturally go off in your head.
Oh, completely. But there was no radiation release. There were no injuries.
Yeah. The International Atomic Energy Agency, the IAEA, they immediately confirmed that all 4 reactors at Barakah are operating completely normally.
And thank goodness for that, honestly, because those 4 reactors provide a massive 25% of the UAE's total electricity.
Right. A quarter of their power. And it's also incredibly important to understand what kind of facility Barakah actually is.
Yeah. Elaborate on that a bit.
So the UAE signed what is known as a strict 103 agreement with the United States.
And if you're not familiar with that term, a 123 agreement essentially ensures that a country's nuclear program is purely, strictly for peaceful civilian energy.
Right. It means the UAE imports its uranium already processed. There is absolutely 0 domestic enrichment happening on site.
0. This facility is entirely different from the highly guarded, heavily enriched uranium programs that are, at the very center of the broader military conflict in the Middle East right now.
Exactly. It is a civilian powerhouse, plain and simple.
So if you are analyzing this, you really have to ask yourself, What does this all mean?
Right, like if the strike didn't cause a meltdown and the plant is a purely civilian facility with no weapons-grade material.
What was the point of flying a drone into it? Why target a peaceful energy grid at all?
Well, the answer is deeply unsettling. It really comes down to pure psychological warfare.
Yeah. According to geopolitical sources cited by the Jerusalem Post, the attack was ordered by Iran.
Though we should probably note that officially, the UAE is still conducting an investigation to determine whether the drones were launched directly by Tehran or by Houthi proxy groups in Yemen.
Right, right. Important distinction. But regardless of whose finger pushed the launch button, the objective wasn't to cause a catastrophic radiological event like Fukushima or Chernobyl.
No, the objective was simply to, quote, send a message.
To send a message. They wanted to prove to the UAE and to the entire watching world that they could strike the reactor itself if they chose to.
And here's where it gets really interesting and, frankly, a bit chilling.
Yeah,
We actually have a very recent precedent for this specific brand of psychological terror against a nuclear facility.
we do. If you look at the academic analysis we have today from the European Research Studies Journal, they meticulously break down a very similar event from February of 2025.
Right, the drone strike on the Chernobyl new safe confinement structure over in Ukraine.
Exactly. In that 2025 incident, a Shahed 136 drone penetrated both the outer and inner layers of the massive steel structure that covers the destroyed Unit 4 reactor at Chernobyl.
And just like yesterday in the UAE, there was no radiation leak.
None. But the academic journal's conclusion on that event was profound. They determined that hitting the Chernobyl structure was a textbook act of psychological warfare.
Because under Article 56 of the Geneva Conventions, nuclear electrical generating stations are granted enhanced special protection during armed conflicts.
Right. Attacking a civilian nuclear site when there is zero military advantage to be gained, simply to induce terror and exert political pressure, is literally classified as a war crime.
And targeting the Barakah plant operates on that exact same terrifying principle.
Think of this not as a military strike aimed at physical destruction, but as a giant explosive geopolitical billboard.
Oh, that's a good way to put it.
Right. The attackers are effectively ringing the doorbell of a $20 billion nuclear facility with a high explosive bomb, just to prove to the world that they can successfully get onto the porch.
Yeah, getting onto the porch, it is about demonstrating reach.
Exactly. It is about demonstrating a willingness to violate what has historically been considered an absolute, untouchable international taboo.
But to really understand why this escalation is happening right now, we have to kind of zoom out from the Barakah plant.
Yeah, we have to look at the broader proxy war engulfing the region.
Because this current wave of conflict didn't just start yesterday.
No, it was really sparked a few months ago on February 28, 2026, following joint U.S.-Israeli military strikes on Iran.
Right, and since that day in late February, the rhetoric from all sides has just been escalating at a breakneck pace.
It really has. Just looking objectively at the statements reported across our sources, U.S. President Donald Trump recently posted on social media that for Iran, quote, the clock is ticking.
The statement he made following a phone call with Israeli Prime Minister Benjamin Netanyahu.
Right. Meanwhile, on the other side, Iranian military advisors have been going on state television to openly declare that their fingers are, quote, on the trigger.
And look, we are not taking sides here.
No, absolutely not. Strictly as analysts observing the board, when you have that level of rhetoric flying back and forth, physical consequences are just inevitable.
They are, and the physical consequence of this escalating standoff has been nothing short of devastating for the global economy.
Yeah, Iran's primary method of retaliation hasn't been a full-scale conventional war. Instead, it has been the de facto closure of the Strait of Hormuz.
And as of today, we are on day 80 of this closure. Day 80.
Which is just wild. For some geographical context, the Strait of Hormuz is a narrow stretch of water between the Persian Gulf and the Gulf of Oman.
And at its narrowest navigable point, it is only about 33 kilometers wide.
Right. That is incredibly narrow when you consider the sheer volume of traffic that passes through it.
It is the ultimate global choke point. I mean, roughly 20% of the entire globe's energy supply flows through that tiny sliver of water.
The numbers we are looking at from this 80-day closure are just staggering. It's almost hard to wrap your mind around them.
Oh, completely. According to reporting from RBC Ukraine and Discovery Alert, there is currently 1 billion barrels of oil trapped behind the strait.
Let me say that again so it really sinks in. 1 billion barrels of oil are effectively locked in a vault that the global market cannot access.
And if we pull up the EIA's May 2026 short-term energy outlook data, they assess that 10.5 million barrels of oil per day were completely shut in across the Middle East just in the month of April alone.
That's insane. We are talking about massive production halts across Iraq, Saudi Arabia, Kuwait, the UAE, Qatar, and Bahrain.
Yeah, it is an unprecedented removal of physical supply from the global market.
It completely upends the fundamental supply and demand models that financial analysts rely on to, predict the global economy.
Right.
Now, I can practically hear what you were thinking right now.
Yeah.
You might be looking at a mental map of the Middle East and thinking, okay, if the waterway is blocked, why can't they just route the oil somewhere else?
Right, like, can't they use trucks or just pump it through overland pipelines to the Red Sea or the Mediterranean?
Exactly. It is a perfectly logical question. But the brutal reality of global energy infrastructure is that there is virtually zero redundancy for the Strait of Hormuz.
None. The sheer mathematics of oil supertankers makes it impossible.
Yeah, one of the only major bypass options is the East-West pipeline in Saudi Arabia.
But that pipeline can only handle a tiny fraction of the volume that normally floats through the strait.
Right. A single supertanker carries millions of barrels. You simply cannot replace the massive daily throughput of an armada of oil tankers with alternative overland routes.
The infrastructure literally does not exist.
It doesn't. So what happens to the global economy when the world's most vital energy artery is clamped shut for 80 days with absolutely no viable bypass available?
You get outright market panic.
You do. Because of this structural physical disruption, traditional oil market models are just breaking down entirely.
Yeah, following the news of the Barakah nuclear plant strike yesterday, which, signaled that regional tensions are only getting worse.
Brent crude jumped to a staggering high of $111.27 a barrel, and WTI crude hit $107.75.
Which is massive. And the reporting from Discovery Alert makes a really crucial point here that explains why everyone on Wall Street is sweating right now.
Yeah, this isn't like past price spikes.
Not at all. Think back to the initial shock of the Russia-Ukraine conflict in 2022, or even the 2019 drone attack on the Abqaiq oil processing facility in Saudi Arabia.
Right, in those instances, we saw massive, violent price spikes, sure.
But they quickly retraced. They went back down as alternative supplies emerged, or in the case of Abqaiq, as the physical damage to the facility was repaired.
Exactly. Those were transient shocks. They were self-limiting.
But because the Hormuz closure is a sustained physical structural constraint on the market, the very nature of the risk premium has fundamentally changed.
Yeah. The markets are no longer pricing oil based on actual inventory fundamentals, like how much oil is in a tank in Oklahoma.
Right. Instead, they are pricing oil based on the unpredictable, open-ended scenarios of proxy warfare.
There is no visible ceiling to these prices because the supply constraint is ongoing, and no one knows if it will end tomorrow or in another 80 days.
Which naturally brings us to the emergency response, right? The Strategic Petroleum Reserve, or SPR.
Right. In an attempt to flood the market and calm prices, the International Energy Agency announced a highly publicized, coordinated draw of 400 million barrels of oil from the SPR.
Now, on paper, that sounds incredibly impressive. I mean, 400 million barrels is the largest coordinated emergency draw in the history of the world.
It is, but let's do the math on that together. If the Hormuz outage is costing the global market roughly 20 million barrels per day in lost transit and shut-in production.
A 400 million barrel release only covers about 20 days of those losses.
20 days, and we are already 80 days into this closure.
Exactly.
You would think that releasing the largest strategic oil reserve in human history would calm the markets down. But think of it like trying to bail out a sinking battleship with a bucket.
That is a perfect analogy.
When institutional investors and energy traders sit down, do the basic math, and realize that 400 million barrels only buys 20 days of runway against an 80-day blockade, it doesn't soothe their panic.
No, it actually validates it.
Yes, it proves to them that even the world's ultimate emergency backup plan is entirely mathematically insufficient to solve the problem.
And that validation of panic leads us directly into a really fascinating yet dangerous economic phenomenon.
The economics of hoarding.
Yeah. Bill O'Grady's financial analysis from Confluence Investment Management provides a brilliant framework for understanding why this is happening.
It really does. Normally, in a healthy functioning market, high oil inventories signal a bearish market.
Right. If there's a ton of oil sitting in storage tanks, it means supply is abundant and therefore the price drops. That's Economics 101.
But when fear takes over the driver's seat, that fundamental rule flips completely upside down.
Consumers, corporations, and entire sovereign nations begin to hoard.
They start aggressively building their personal or national inventories, not because they need the oil today, but because they are terrified the product will simply become unavailable tomorrow at any price.
And when this psychology takes hold, you start to see a positive correlation between inventory and price.
Both go up at the exact same time. Everyone is buying to hoard, which drives the price up, which terrifies people into hoarding more.
O'Grady calls this the error of composition.
Right. It is a classic logical fallacy where you mistakenly assume that what is rational for the individual is also rational for the whole group.
Let's talk through a hypothetical to make this concrete.
Sure.
Imagine you are a mid-sized country that just received a massive shipment of oil from that 400 million barrel SPR release.
Okay.
At the micro level, as the leader of that country, hoarding that oil is a perfectly reasonable, rational response to a massive global supply shock. You want to protect your citizens and your economy from running out of gas.
Makes total sense.
But at the macro level, when every country makes that exact same rational decision simultaneously, it creates a disaster.
Yeah. If the nations receiving the released SPR oil just aggressively stockpile it within their own borders instead of letting it flow freely into the commercial market, global prices will actually rise further.
The very mechanism designed to save the market, the SPR release, ends up being cannibalized by national fear.
Completely defeating its own purpose.
Exactly. And the macroeconomic impact of this dynamic is incredibly severe.
We aren't just talking about it being more expensive to fill up your car. Moody's has issued a stark warning that prolonged oil prices hovering in that $90 to $110 range could reduce global real GDP growth by anywhere from 0.2% to 0.8%.
That might sound like a tiny fraction, but in global GDP terms, that represents hundreds of billions of dollars in lost economic activity.
It does. It threatens severe, sweeping recessionary risks, particularly for emerging market economies that have to import all their oil, and for the energy-intensive manufacturing sectors over in Europe.
It is a vicious cascading effect.
Let's trace the dominoes we've uncovered today.
Yeah, let's look at the whole picture.
A geopolitical event restricts supply at a tiny 33-kilometer choke point. That physical restriction fundamentally shifts the market's risk premium.
That shift induces terror, which sparks global hoarding.
Right. That hoarding drives prices higher despite the largest emergency interventions in human history.
And finally, those stubbornly high prices drag down global economic growth, threatening recessions around the world.
And all the while, the geopolitical theater continues to escalate, culminating in yesterday's drone striking a generator at a civilian nuclear plant in the desert.
A strike designed not to destroy, but to terrorize.
Exactly. We started today with a single drone in the UAE, and we traced that shockwave through 1 billion barrels of trapped oil in the Strait of Hormuz, all the way to a fundamental rewiring of how global energy markets price risk and the real threats to our global GDP.
It really highlights how deeply interconnected and, frankly, how incredibly fragile the global infrastructure truly is.
It does. An action at a single maritime choke point or a single symbolic strike on a nuclear reactor's perimeter reverberates violently through every single aspect of the global economy.
Without a doubt.
Which leaves me with a final, provocative thought for you to mull over today.
Let's hear it.
With civilian nuclear power plants now actively being normalized as giant billboards for psychological leverage, and critical maritime shipping lanes effectively being weaponized and shut down for months on end, will the future of global energy rely less on which country has the most abundant natural resources in the ground, and more on which country can build the most impenetrable, self-sustaining fortress around their domestic power grids?
That is a really heavy question.
It seems we are moving from an era of resource extraction to an era of resource defense.
And that changes everything.
It really does. Well, thank you so much for joining me on this deep dive. I hope this helped unpack the massive headlines we are seeing today.
Thanks for having me. It was a great conversation.
Before you go, please don't forget one last time to like, subscribe, follow, and turn on the notification bell so you are always up to date with our latest analysis. Take care of yourselves, and we'll see you next time.